Hi, Miss Sharron. It's Shanita. Thank you so much for joining us today. I love watching your talks and reading all of your posts on Facebook with all of the wonderful tidbits of history. Juneteenth is not a new holiday to me, but it's a new holiday on my list of things to celebrate. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel comfortable this year, throwing up the Juneteenth post, and because it's just I don't really know enough about it to feel comfortable being like, yay Juneteenth, because I'm like, if someone were to ask me, I don't really have a whole lot of information to share with them. So That's why I wanted to talk to you today, just so that I could get a personal perspective, so that I really feel comfortable sharing. And as African American people, a lot of our history is told, and
the oral tradition.
And thank God for technology, because now we're in a space where we can take that oral history and record it so that it can be accurately shared, instead of, it's like that game of telephone, right? You tell the first person something, and by the time it gets to the last person, you're like, I didn't say
nowhere near what it started out, right? Let's start with Juneteenth as it's been celebrated. We here in Kansas City, Missouri, we were fortunate to have the late Horace Peterson III, the founder of the Black Archives of Mid-America, Inc. He is the gentleman that brought the celebration to Kansas City after he had visited in Texas. So Kansas City began celebrating Juneteenth in 1980. Contrary to what the person that currently occupies the White House said, he did not make it popular. Our people have been celebrating Juneteenth for a very long time. Now, those talk about 1863 and the Emancipation Proclamation. However, the first Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln issued was issued at April 16, 1862. And that was the first Emancipation Proclamation. And it was issued in Washington, D.C. And it was called the Compensated Emancipation Act. Compensated, why? Because the federal government paid the 3,000 paid enslavers to release 3,000 enslaved Africans that were in Washington, D.C. If the owner, so the enslaver, others refer to as owner, I say enslaver, if the enslaver agreed to be loyal to the Union, he could be compensated up to $300 per person.
Oh, wow.
Yes, per enslaved person. And those who were enslaved, once they were freed, if they could also be compensated, their compensation was up to $100, and transportation if they agreed to voluntary immigration, i.e. colonization. Abraham Lincoln wanted Africans to leave this country. So that was the first Emancipation Proclamation.
And I got that.
April 16th, 1862.
And I know that this is like drama and Hollywood, but when I watched the last Abraham Lincoln movie, I like old movies about history, and then I'm the person who's at the movie theater Googling, all the movies, so that I can remember to go back and read about the things that I saw in there to find out if they were historically accurate or not. But I did feel like that they portrayed in that movie Lincoln, that he was like super duper torn. It doesn't feel like he really wanted to free the slaves. It was just more
a
political
he did
thing
not.
with him, the North and the South. So now that I know that after watching that movie, this thing that some of us have in our culture where we're like, oh, Abe Lincoln. And I'm like, well, Abe Lincoln didn't really care about Black people.
Right. And you, for those must remember, Lincoln quoted, he stated if he could save the Union without freeing the slaves, he would have done so. But he knew in order to save the Union, he had to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. And secondly, if it had not been for African American troops, he would not have been able to win the Civil War.
Oh, wow.
There's an excellent book by the late historian Lerone Bennett. It's called Forced into Glory. Forced into Glory. And it's about Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the show notes.
Yes. Plus, individuals must remember, once African Americans were freed, they were automatic. Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation, so-called freed those that were in the states that were in rebellion.
Okay.
So that's another thing. It wasn't everybody, let's go. It was only the states that were in rebellion against the Union. So basically, it was a document that had no teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Because those states were fighting against the Union, they were not going to listen to what Lincoln had to say. So
Right.
That's the myth of the 1863 Proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation. So let's be very clear about that. So when we say Juneteenth, we freed ourselves. We did not, our ancestors did not sit idly by waiting to be freed. They utilized various means to obtain freedom. Be it rebellion, that's another thing they didn't teach in school. They may have mentioned Nat Turner. Rarely did they talk about Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, and all the other countless. Maybe you heard about Toussaint Overture in Haiti, but rarely did they do an in-depth discussion about rebellion. There was various means that we utilized to obtain our freedom, but we fought for our freedom. We were not given, we earned our freedom. And I want people to remember, I talked about the $5,000 that the soldiers of the 62nd and the 65th, that's $5,000 in 1865. And you might say, well, where did they get $5,000 from? Remember, our soldiers were not paid during the time they fought because they refused their pay. If you've seen the film Glory, during the one scene in the movie Glory, you will see the soldiers tearing up the pay because they had been promised one amount of pay when they enlisted. They were promised to be paid the same amount that white soldiers were paid. And when they received their first pay, they were not paid that. And so they tore it up, and for 2 years, they refused to accept their pay. They fought for their freedom without compensation.
See, this is the thing that we've been talking about every Tuesday, is that the only way that we can control the narrative is if we start telling our stories. Because every time I talk to you, I learn something, and then I have to come home and get on the computer because it's just, I just don't know. And then the versions that you get are so whitewashed and made so neat and tidy that then you're like, you get back to it and you're like, that's not even really how that happened. Again, it's that whole game of telephone where it just is come down and down. And then of course, the people who are writing the books and writing the movies and writing the scripts don't really tell the story. Because over the weekend, to kind of get my mind in the thought of Juneteenth, I rewatched Roots, but I didn't watch the original version. I rewatched the latest version on the History Channel. And it's like, and I did that because they're so different. They're so different. How is this someone's story, but the version in the original version was very whitewashed compared to the current version? And it's like just looking at how they remade the movie in the last couple of years, and even how it's not completely truthful, but how media has come a long way with how they want to portray the stories. Because as a kid watching Roots, the original slaves were awfully freaking happy. And I'm like, I mean, y'all making it seem like these people really enjoyed their enslavement, and they didn't.
No.
So
not at all. There are various accounts and narratives when I was that are available now to read, and you can read first person accounts, and it was not a glorious time at all. And people mistakenly think that those in the House house versus field, that those in the house had it good. I read a narrative of a woman that was in the house, and she talked about how horrible it was. Can you imagine not to have any control over your own body and be up to this person's whim, beck and call whenever he decided that he wanted to have sex with her? And it wasn't lovemaking, having sex. And then because she was favored by him, she was despised by his wife. So then she would be, when he would go out of town, then the wife would brutalize her. So so we have to be real clear about that.
So as we're looking towards, it's like we're making this move, and everybody wants to be more pro Black history, pro knowing our history. As we start to celebrate Juneteenth, and employers are giving people the day off, and there's petitions going around making this a national holiday, like, as a historian, what do you feel like as Black people we really need to be considering as we're celebrating this as a holiday? Now I know all these posts about this was my freedom, my Independence Day are false. So I will not be sharing any of those because it's not our Independence Day. We weren't all free for a whole another year or two later.
One of the things I hope that people will take the time to do research and to look at those individuals who contributed to the liberation, to our freedom, by various means. There were those who chose to poison individuals. There were those who chose to make the ultimate sacrifice and to kill themselves and their children rather to be enslaved. And then there were those who sought legal recourse for freedom. In Missouri, there are over 301 cases that individuals can go online, and they're called the freedom suits. Over 301 individuals who were enslaved filed lawsuits in circuit court in Missouri for their freedom. And 50% of them were successful in obtaining their freedom. But the actual cases are now online, available at the circuit court website. Freedom suits.
Amazing to me is that they didn't even teach us how to read. We taught ourselves, and then we go on to be enslaved and go to medical school and write cookbooks and teach recipes and do nursing work. And so I think that what I'm taking from this is that as I'm going to incorporate Juneteenth into my family, it's a celebration of strength and resilience, because we come from a resilient people. We just, and I don't think that we know that. The way that the story gets told to us, it's so victimized.
Right.
Survivorship is in our DNA. And that is why we're able to survive and adapt and thrive, because that's just who we are as a people.